Vijen Patel. An official welcome to the Let's Grab Coffee podcast.
I got my liquid IV into the coffee,
I know,
my kombucha, so
I, you
better
know,
than coffee.
we don't judge here, dude. It can be let's grab tea, let's grab kombucha. The coffee is interchangeable,
Oh,
is
yeah.
how we like to do it here. I always like to start, especially with Chicago folks. A lot of my Chicago friends will know you, but a lot of our listeners are not based in Chicago, Canada, the Middle East, all over the US, Europe. In short, you're a consultant investor turned founder. You started a company in a very unassuming industry, which is the, the laundry business. You create sort of a tech-enabled 24/7 laundry business and laundromat. You then sell that to Procter and Gamble. Surprisingly and kind of weirdly enough, you never took outside capital when building Pressbox, the company that you founded. But then you start when you exited, you serve as CEO of Tide Cleaners with P&G, couple of years, and then you start your own venture fund because you take a lot of lessons you learned as a founder to build a founder first fund, investing in what others would consider boring businesses or unsexy industries. You, aside from being a founder and just a man of many talents, you're a father of two. I see on your LinkedIn that you haven't read 172 books, is it? So I'm going to ask
They're
you
all
about
right here. I'm looking at them.
that. Yeah, accumulating dust. Well, you're executing what they're professing. It's more important. So many great pieces to you. I'm genuinely very excited, and as someone who's been in Chicago for 6 to 7 years, you really are, man, someone I truly look up to. Even though I know we don't know each other that intimately, but as a first gen myself, as a guy who's immigrated from the Middle East, having stories like you and yours in Chicago is very inspiring.
George, I feel like that's the end of the podcast. I can walk away, but it's funny you say that. I've had this realization, and you and I, I'm sure, have the luxury to travel to so many cities, and this country is awesome. There's so many incredible gifts, but every time I come back home, I don't think there's a place that's better than Chicago to start the American dream, right? Like your background, my background, my parents were from India and Uganda. You go out to suburbs. Like one thing I love is like the best ramen in Chicago is in Arlington Heights. You want the best Indian food, go out to Schaumburg, right? Like Polish food, go to Ukrainian Village. And like ultimately what attracts, I think the coolest thing about Chicago is you end up getting 70% of New York at 30% of the price.
Mm.
And this entire country is built on immigrants. And I keep coming back to the foundation of Chicago, which is like, if you're an immigrant or even have ties to that, there's no better place in the country, I believe, to start than here.
Yeah, I'm gonna press you on that real quick, in terms of like adding to it, but I'm gonna share this sort of quick because it's a perfect segue to start this. I'm sure you're familiar with Michael Fosnot
Yeah. I like
in
Michael a
Chicago,
lot.
right? Yeah. So we did a podcast episode about 2 weeks ago,
Yeah.
and I asked him something similar. You know what he told me? So his answer was actually it really resonated, and he said something to the tune of, he used to be the chief marketing officer for the city. This is a guy who immigrated from Germany, and in his words, he says, he has a noticeable German accent. And he's like, it's funny because I don't believe that in Germany, someone who's not German could be the chief marketing officer of a major city like Frankfurt.
Yeah.
And it's so just in the sense of, you know, opening the gates and allowing someone that might not be quote unquote American who's lived in the US for 30, 40 years, just the possibilities to do things that are unworldly. I think that's the American dream in my opinion. There's possibility to be great.
100%. And again, we're not perfect. This country's not perfect, but it's still the best of the worst in a lot of ways. And
Yeah.
I agree. I mean, that's incredible testament to obviously everything that Michael's done. But the fact that he got to that position, right, just like it shows he had the merit to do it, the spirit to do it. I mean, him and I talk a lot, but like Chicago's has so many great fundamentals, an economic base that's pretty diversified. And honestly, the one thing we need to work on is just PR. We had, Obama, we had the Bulls, and now we don't have anything, and we need to create something to occupy that space.
We love Vijen Patel now. It's different, homie.
Right. But Michael and I talk about this all the time, but there's an
Mm.
incredible infrastructure here, and we need to start playing to its advantages.
Why do you think that is? So everybody keeps talking about this marketing problem that Chicago has. And I know, organizations like World Business Chicago, doing a good job and I know trying very hard to keep enforcing the pro Chicago mantra. But why do you think that is? You've been here for a very long time. You've seen different cycles.
It's a different, there's a different lenses on it, right? There's a venture capital one, which you and I are kind of closer to, and I got strong thoughts on that.
Mhm.
But it's in general, if you were like, for instance, if I was in private credit, I don't know if people know this, but like we are the private credit mecca of the world. You go up and down Wacker or lower mid-market buyout. There are some world-class firms here, right? Everyone, you go in the round, you talk about lower middle market, like everyone knows about Shore Capital.
Shortcut. Yeah.
You talk about private credit, you've got Ares, Golub, Monroe, right? Like you've got incredible institutions here. And so there's a lot of great stuff doing here. I think in the venture world, those two asset classes, I would say they're at the opposite end of the barbell, but they're more down to earth industries. They're not necessarily industries where you're compensated for upside, you're compensated by not having a downside. And a lot of that infrastructure does not go well towards venture, right? Venture is an asset class of dreaming.
Mm.
But that's like on the business side. But I think otherwise, it's we are not good talking about ourselves because that is why Chicago's awesome, right? Like what I love about this is like you said earlier, but like my neighbors, they have no idea who I am, nor do they care. Like they just ask about my family and my kids, and like they're kind of curious about how the Cubs are doing. And I frankly love that because I think about how I want to raise my family, and it's people, kids who are down to earth, grounded. They respect everyone with the sincerity and authenticity. And it just goes against the grain. But I will say, on the flip side of that, I was in Boston two weeks ago, and I met like a bunch of the family offices for what we're doing, and I met like almost everyone in a couple days. And I was like, if you had to do that in Chicago, it would take like a few weeks. And
Yeah.
a lot of these people, they're not great talking about it, but they stick together. And at the end of the day, like I want to ride and die with these people. Like this is our tribe. And when like push comes to shove, I have like 10, 15 great people that I would lean on in a hard moment. And I think they'd step up. And ultimately, like I think happiness comes back to relationships. And this city has incredible relationships. And one last story, I'll finish this note on because I'm starting to ramble, but I think it's powerful.
Hmm.
As you know, we built the biggest dry cleaner in America, 1,200 locations, 10 cities. We were entertaining offers, and P&G at the time had a local startup, and for them, logically, their question was to build or buy, right? And so, do they build their own or do they buy us? And ultimately, they pursued that by talking to our partners and offering them money, straight up cash, to switch from Pressbox to their company. And we had about 250 locations. And how many do you think, George, of those 250 said yes, they would switch from Pressbox to a P&G subsidiary?
Not many. If probably none. I
One.
would-
One did.
Yeah,
One did.
fairly
And
close.
the reason I say that is at the end of the day,
Mm.
because they all forwarded me the emails, they forwarded me the letters,
That's loyalty right there, though. Yeah.
and exactly. And at the end of the day, they all said, look, 10, 15, 20 grand, 50 grand. Yeah, it's nice.
Mm.
But like at the end of the day, Drew and Vijen, they did what they said they would do. And we've kind of built trust, and they were there for us, and we've got their back.
Mm.
And that was an incredible testament. And in a lot of ways, that's why I'm loyal to Chicago. Is at the end of the day, we're surrounded by incredible people, a great moral fortitude, and I think they'll have our back. And that's how you build a community. And ultimately, upon that community, you build a city.
I love that. Yeah. And to your point, it doesn't have to be like your interests don't have to be national. A lot of what you can do from a civic perspective is it could start with your family. It's like that analogy of that long-winded story of to change the world, start by changing yourself and changing your family. So it kind of like it's the onion peel. You start with yourself, the family, the town, the company, and it just compounds from there.
Yeah.
And if everybody did that, then you have national change.
And you think about it in dark moments, right? You either have an option, run towards or run away, right?
Mm.
And in a lot of times in life, you have darker moments. And I like to be surrounded by people who are running towards the fire instead of running away from the fire.
Yeah, I love that. You talk a lot about some things I'm just running down here: trust, loyalty, tribe. You talk about morals and values, and it gets me thinking. I know your roots go back to India,
Yeah.
but I think you were born in the U.S.
I was born in the US, correct.
Okay, parents immigrated from India, assumingly.
So funny enough, dad, yes. My mom was born in Uganda
Hmm.
and then got kicked out of there was a big coup in 1972. Uday Mean kicked out all Asians out of the country. So overnight, my parents picked up everything, and my mom went to London, then Canada, then America. But yes, immigrants.
Oh, no way!
Yeah.
Wow, that's yeah, that's sort of hard earned immigrant roadshow as many go through, unfortunately.
But it's peppered across America, right?
Yeah, it's what unites a lot of people together. Curious because like these are tenets that are quite strong, right, in Indian culture or maybe from your mom's case, in Uganda. Nonetheless, it's you see that with immigrant stories quite often. How much has that sort of inspired who you've become, call it 30, 40 years later?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'm curious for you. I mean, my guess is something similar, but I think often my parents, and more so my grandparents, had to start over 3 times in life, right? From India to Uganda, Uganda to England, England to America ultimately. And every time that happened, they had nothing. And who they leaned on to start with was their community, right? Whether it was a job, a break, an introduction. And so I think that's like pretty fortified into, right. You see that it's funny. It's like a classic adage that translates well with venture, but like I use this quote that everyone wants to give you money when you don't need it. No one wants to give you money when you need it. And it's the same thing, right, in like in life in a lot of ways. When I laugh, like I can meet with everyone, almost anyone now in Chicago because I built the biggest dry cleaner and it's Tide Cleaners, and that's harder to like. Someone's like, oh man, I wish I had these relationships when I started 10 years ago.
Uh,
And so to me, it's a lot about these relationships at the core when you really need them the most and making sure people are there for you. Again, it's like the same adage as like who's there for you during the dark times.
mm.
And oftentimes it was family, friends of family. But ultimately, I think that's where you really see the true character of people is during the dark times more than the good times.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, I grew up in the Middle East. I was born in Lebanon, and a lot of what I think of, in the Middle East, like whenever I go back home, the nostalgic moment for me is when I'm surrounded by family that are just so genuinely happy to see me, and I'm genuinely happy to see them. And there's no talk of like, what are you doing, or how's your growth role in Chicago, or
How do you have? Yeah.
zero. And it's yeah, it's like it's amazing how much time and energy you can feel not having to talk about, the things that we place a lot of status on.
Yeah.
That's really refreshing, man.
Yep.
So that's tribe to me.
I appreciate that. I agree. And yeah, I agree. At the end of the day, it's so funny. We're all I feel like we all have, especially with immigration, honestly, even the American dream and even people who aren't in fifth, sixth, seventh generation, we all stand on the generation of our elders and on the shoulders of that. And we're, at least for me, I'm always reminded of that. And so if my grandparents didn't have their community lead on, there's no way in hell that I had the chance to work at McKinsey and private equity and all of that. And so again, I guess it comes down to a sense of gratitude,
Yeah.
but also making sure I pay it forward to the next generation.
Yeah, thankfully you say gratitude. It's good framing. I used to always say I have a sense of guilt,
Yeah.
and I've had to reframe that because sometimes you carry unnecessary pressure.
Yeah.
That why was I the one who escaped, and I have a Canadian citizenship now, and I'm working and living in the U.S. and I have the ability to prosper. That comes with some level of guilt.
George, that's awesome though that you like, right? I think we use this quote a lot that like some of the people I love working with the most are insecure overachievers.
Yeah,
But more deeper, it's like you have an incredible opportunity, right? And I think what I hear from you instead is that you don't want to squander it.
yeah,
And that's worthy, right? And at the end of the day, there's a lot of people who do squander it, but ultimately you know what you have and you're trying to make the most of it, which again, going back to the American dream, that's it. And don't sell yourself short.
yeah. Definitely keeping that in mind, my friend. You grew up in a family of physicians, which I found is very. I mean, it's not funny because it's also it's like
Yeah.
in Middle Eastern culture, you're either a doctor, engineer, or lawyer.
Yeah.
Everything else is like you're having a good time.
Yeah.
So growing, is that? Did you feel a little bit of pressure? Growing up with a family of physicians, then you major in mathematics, right? It's sort of the business aspect, finance, and then you go into what many would deem the formal track, right? Consulting. I think you started at Goldman.
Yeah. Goldman and McKinsey.
Goldman, McKinsey, and then you joined a private equity firm. Yeah. So did you feel a little bit of pressure before becoming a founder? Like, did you know you wanted to be an entrepreneur? Were you just like
Oh,
suppressing that?
I'm so happy you chose the word suppressing because that's exactly what it was. And still to this day, George, the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my life was call my mom to tell her and my dad, but my mom more specifically, that I was leaving private equity to go start a dry cleaner. And effectively her response was like, no, like, no, you're not. And, I like at the time, I mean, it's easy to laugh at it now, but if you play back everything I just told you, which is like having a start life over 3 times and, the sacrifices everyone makes. And, I'm an only child. And so bearing all that in mind and then saying, hey, I'm going to throw it all away a fourth time to start over. And now as a dad of two, I get it. I get what it would be like to receive that phone call. And it was hard, but I will say like, now having the luxury of being able to look back, I was always supposed to be an entrepreneur, to your point. Like, I remember selling soda at like a high school camp, like on a hot day because I was alone with a fridge. And I remember selling Cubs, like I see your Bulls post, like I sold Cubs tickets when Ticketmaster went out. And like I like figured out the internet and like connected 3 or 4 computers and like sold it and made like 3 grand. So like I think in a lot of ways, you know, a bit more of the traditional family pushing to do that actually was what suppressed it, and I needed to do this. And again, there's a balance here of being grateful again to have the luxury to do it, but ultimately, like, this is who I'm supposed to be. And, we'll talk about, I'm sure, AI or whatever, but, like, I think the creative side of more and more people will come out in the following generations because of the democratization of resources and ultimately opportunity.
What was a tipping point for you? Because to your point about suppressing, like I'm sure at some point, and this had to have been when you were at the private equity shop. But like when did that? Yeah, I guess what did you viscerally feel like this is I can't do this anymore? Because I feel like a lot of people resonate with what you're saying in that chapter of your life, but actually making the leap is obviously the hardest part about it.
It's funny. Yes. Like at the end of the day, it was just an acknowledgement that like I was kind of miserable. Like I didn't belong in front of a computer all day. I'm sure I can crank on models, I can keep going, but like I just wasn't great at it. And guess what? When you're happy doing something, like you end up being pretty good at it. And I think it was just a wake up call to be like, this is not who I'm supposed to be. So it was a little bit of pain. And it's actually funny, I was in San Francisco, and when I go back to San Fran, George, I'll, like, realize I, like, land there, I'm like, there's almost like a cloud over me, I was like, "Man, I must have been, like, kind of depressed when I was doing this because I was kinda just, like, going through the motions and didn't have that gusto." And I think in today's world, because we talked about earlier with the democratization of resources and how competitive it is, it's like, if you're not enjoying something, your odds of success are just lower. And now I'm talking what I'm doing now, which I have the luxury to be able to do of back, kinda like seed strapped, like found like almost bootstrap founders in a way, more tight cleaners. And like, I would do this job for free. Like, I'm having so much fun. It's so purpose led. We're finding out like a really cool niche. And because of that, work doesn't feel like work, it feels like play. And because of that, I think actually we're gonna do better. This might be more successful than the last thing because it just has a different stride. But you're exactly right. In essence, it was a little bit of pain that had to be the wake up call.
Got it. So you obviously pick up the phone finally and you address that pain into more pain, which is starting a company, especially early days. It's obviously fun too, but yeah, it doesn't come without its challenges.
The quote I like says like everyone tries to escape a 40-hour week to then work 80 hours.
Yeah, exactly. I think what I like in your story too is you sort of deem as like Pressbox basically recreating the experience. And I'm assuming there had to be a lot of that consulting mental model, operational vision that had to apply some form of structure and rigor to this. How did you? Because what really stood out to me is you could have started everything or anything you wanted to in any industry. You decide to tackle something that's very antiquated. It hasn't changed much, and you're figuring out how do I, mix software and hardware into this quote unquote boring industry. So how do you go about recreating in the laundry business?
Jordan, I feel like you're being very like, you're giving me a lot more credit because it didn't feel like that, right? I'll never forget in the first year of Pressbox, I learned more than all the private equity and McKinsey combined because there's just a different level of authenticity and rigor. And like PowerPoint is not going to clean clothes. Like you've got to go hustle and execute. But ultimately, I do think, I think about like combining, like we did tech enabled service, right? And one thing I'm always reminded of, I recommend it's on that 173 books, although this is one I have read, is a book called Rational Optimist.
Mm,
It's one of my favorite books because it pretty much says like, if you're rational, actually, you should be optimist because there's innovation all over the place. And the simplest definition of innovation is combining two things. That's it, right? Think about the wheel and the rail. Think about a phone and internet, right? For us, it was dry cleaning and more or less like a locker. And then going forward, right? Like I'm so amazed. Like, we'll look back in 20 years, I think we'll see the convergence of biology and technology or biology and like code in a way, right? But it's kind of simplest in its way. And I think there's so much more out there, but there's also a real herd and group mentality, right? Like that's human nature is like people just want to follow where the puck is going. And so it's hard to be independent thinkers sometimes. And ultimately, more than any of the McKinsey background, which was helpful, right? Like I would say more than the structuring and all of like the problem solving. It was just like learning how to communicate and lead a team of ultimately 250 people. But it was most importantly, it was focus. Like, I didn't realize, George, until the end, but, like, putting my head down for 7 days a week, 7 years, like, was a blessing to not have raised venture or any capital because I had nothing but to just focus on dry cleaning via boxes every day. And ultimately, that was, like, the biggest driver of our success.
Yeah, the focus is something I relate to through a colleague who I was working with and reported to. So I used to be at a fintech startup, and he was one of the co-founders who was ex-BCG.
Mm,
And so on the business development side, we used to meet, weekly, if not, we were talking all the time, but we had this like, weekly stand up. And he would, whenever we'd parse out activities, he'd say, George, this shouldn't take you more than 15 minutes, you know? So he was very time oriented because he's an
Hi,
operation.
baby.
Yeah. Yeah. This shouldn't take more than 20 minutes.
Yeah.
This is a 30-minute exercise. So that always put things into perspective. So, okay, that's helpful to know. The one sort of friction point I thought about too when you're trying to build this business is aside from everything else, the one thing that came to my mind is how do you build trust with your consumers?
Yeah.
And I don't know if you know where I'm going with this, but when it's tech enabled, meaning like how did you get to this level of scale where people trusted your platform enough to drop, let's say, a suit that might cost $500 or a tuxedo into a locker and expect a certain level of standard and quality?
It's a great question. And ultimately, this is like, and this is actually the thesis behind 81, but effectively,
Yeah.
growth and trust have like an inverse relationship. And actually, to push it further and say growth and quality. And so, right, a lot of like, if you consistently produce high quality over a long period of time, that should build trust. And one of the best things we ever did, George, was when we started this, and this is where I'll give some credit to like having spent time at McKinsey or the buy side, is we ended up sharing our idea with everyone. Right. Yeah, sometimes people get protective over their ideas and like sign this
Stealthy.
NDA and all of it. And there's legitimacy to some of those. But generally speaking, like we talked about success, like there's no worse ideas than starting to bootstrap a dry cleaner because ultimately, like any entrepreneur will tell you this, but like 95% of the reason why entrepreneurs are successful is because of execution. And execution often goes down to focus. And so one thing we did was just share our idea with everyone. And one of the biggest things people said was, we don't want to throw ourselves into a locker. And, at the time, think about it, this is 2013. It's like dry cleaning was like kind of like normal part of day. People were like, we like going to our dry cleaner so I can, point out the stain, tell the specific instructions. And then we just sat on that feedback on like why we would fail. And then we was like, what can we do to mitigate that? And so very quickly, we actually added a shelf on the side of our lockers and hardware with very simply a card and a pen and paper. We also added a sticker roll where it had like stains. And so people could put their own stains on there. And like one by one, we just heard every concern and just started trying to mitigate it. And it worked, right? Ultimately, it's like now we have this view that like, and again, this is a different flavor of startup, right? But like for this flavor in these unsexy industries, it's just about not dying. And we just did everything we could to make sure we didn't die or like have attrition. And the other thing that you hit on with trust and quality is in these industries, they're incredibly long lasting and durable. But what matters most is retention. The difference between 99 and 97% retention, it may not sound like a lot, but when you compound that month over month, George,
It's huge.
huge. It's actually like, I think we ran the numbers like at 95%, I think that's like 50%. At 98%, it's like 76 or something after 2 years. Those are huge. When you compound that month over month, cohort by cohort, those are material. So ultimately, what you're saying, trust and quality was absolutely what kept us up at night every night.
Yeah, well, a lot of that too is like what you're, and I love the fact that you opened it up. It's also like just market consensus. They usually teach you this, but it's true. Like some startup founders take the other route, which in some cases maybe is valid, where you're super stealthy, you don't talk to anybody.
Yeah.
It's funny too. I don't know if you've ever heard of like the objection of some people believe customers are always right, and some people are the belief of they're not always right, and sometimes it seems like in your case they are always right, and the only way this actually worked is listening, but then configuring what they're actually trying to tell you in a way that works.
Yeah, exactly. And look, it's like 80/20 is back to it. Like there were times where we had to fire customers because it's like, look, we've got system, like, once we had scale, we have systems and processes. And it's like, if you're trying to break those systems, like I will happily refer you to another dry cleaner. We just can't do it. And also, I think being like just honest about that was important. And the other thing you said is like, there are so many different flavors of building. right? And that's actually something as a watch out now as an investor, a watch out we have is like, George, say you and I and 4 other top founders wanna go build Tide Cleaners again or any company. We would all build it in different ways, and many of those ways could be successful. So ultimately, like, we need to exercise that empathy that there's many different paths to success, and frankly, that's the beauty of, like, human creation.
Did you expect fundraising to be that hard?
For Pressbox or
Yeah,
81?
oh, I guess both. Yeah, we'll get to 81 in a sec, but
Uh, it's
as a
funny.
founder, I mean.
I had come from the buy side, and so, after we had a few conversations and in Chicago, and generally speaking, everyone's like, "That sounds too hard, no way." After 4 or 5, I had to come from the buy side, and again, private equity is different, but kinda I was like, "What am I getting here?" Like, I will put my own money into this and prove it out, but I do have a couple of regrets, and one of them was that I wish we did raise around the year 3 mark,
Mhm.
and we ended up getting some term sheets from some really good firms, and ultimately, like, we knew at this point we were probably kinda path to exit, so it didn't make sense. But it was interesting that, like, it was hard. It was hard. And again, it kinda you have to talk to some of the VCs about why it was that way, but, it was hard. I think probably if I stayed in the Bay Area, I would have done it. I mean, I've got a couple friends who, really close friends who did go down that path, and they're still building. But ultimately, yeah, it's just again, it goes back to, like, everyone wants to give you money when you don't need it. They don't wanna give you money when you need it. And that's all. That's just gonna be a conundrum that every founder has to deal with.
Well, literally to this day, you'll hear VC say, "Look, come back to me, come back to me when you find a lead." And it's like, well, in that case, it's like, well, why are we having this
I know.
conversation? But I also understand there's economics and all that stuff. For folks who haven't experienced growing a bootstrap business, what was that like for you? Because obviously there's pros and cons, right? Yes, you can scale faster if you raise capital, but you also have, you have other investors on the board, and they also have their incentives and their shareholders and a direction that they want to take the company.
Yeah.
You don't have that. But then with Bootstrapped, it's like you have the pressure of cash flowing because that's the only way you pay and you grow.
That's right. And you're not subsidized, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say there's pros and cons of both, right? But George, I think one thing that and honestly, I tell founders this all the time, and it's against my own interest, but like you should bootstrap, especially in 2025. Everything is like democratized. Like I didn't have Webflow, I didn't have OpenAI, I didn't have like Shopify and Zendesk, and just like go on and on. Like the AI infrastructure is outstanding. And so, like, I just generally don't think you need more than $50,000 to at least get going. And so why wouldn't you bet on yourself is something that I think about, but zoom back out, actually, it's been a full cycle here because, George, the truth is I felt actually a lot of shame in bootstrapping, right? It's easy now to look back and be like, "Oh, it was awesome." Like,
Mm.
even the word bootstrapping has this, like, weird connotation, right? It's like
Like you're chugging along. Yeah, it has a
Moving
weird.
along, I'm, like, kinda worthless, I'm homeless, like, all that stuff, and so for a long time, I was like, "Why can't we get backed?" Right? And it only happened more recently in the last, like, 2 years where that shame turned into pride, and it was only because I started to see more of, the venture-backed ways, and I think it's ridiculous that oftentimes you'll meet these companies who raise 5,000,000, 15,000,000, and out of that is, like, 1,000,000 of revenue or, like, 2,000,000. You're like, "Wait, I don't get it. 15 to 2?" And it's like, "What is this?" Like, it just doesn't make sense. And ultimately, I think this is the conundrum, and you're starting to see this play out in the market, and there there's a bit of a cleansing going out right now, but there's too much capital out there, and I think there's actually, like, 2 giant forces that are, like, going in completely different directions. One is that founders need less and less and less, and AUM in the world is growing, growing, growing. So, like, this is gonna diverge, and I don't know how it will manifest. I've got a couple theories, but I actually think bootstrapping's finally in vogue, and you're seeing this a lot, but, like, I genuinely don't think a top founder needs a ton of capital today. Like, a top founder should have clarity on sources and uses and knows exactly how much they need to build, and clearly growth is growth, and, like, if you need to invest behind growth, that's fine. But, like, it's a fascinating world right now because we have an entire generation of founders who kind of been backed by VC, and I think there's growing misalignment, right? Because the other thing I'll quickly add is, like, this tool venture that was created to get you there faster, it also does move the goalpost, right? And not every like, our theory on 81 is, like, I can't IPO tied, like, Pressbox. I could never have done it. My logical exit was always strategic. And I think the dirty secret in venture is, like, everyone promises these IPOs, and then they deliver strategic exits. So if you're just honest about the exit, just finance against it appropriately. You'll end up realizing that you don't want like a ton of markups.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's the perspective that you get when you were a founder, having gone through that process, and now you're an investor, right? And then even that's a debate. It's like, do former founders make better investors?
So, the data's out there and it actually says no. Some of the
Why do you
biggest
think that is? Personally, not like I'm not. I'm asking more anecdotally than.
I think it's because of 2 reasons. 1, my job, first, second, and third is to steward capital. That's the most important part. If people have trusted me with their capital, and so I need to make hard decisions to make sure that I steward that capital appropriately. At times, that does go against interest, right? Of founders, of like myself. And ultimately, this is why we try to operate with ridiculous transparency with our founders as to, like, what they need for follow on. We'll go as far as like, hey, these are KPIs you need to hit, stuff like that, because we never want to leave a founder exposed while also taking care of our customer, which in this case is our investors. The second thing is I think that empathy we talked about, where like
Hmm.
it's important to know what you don't know, or know that you don't know. And oftentimes I think it's very easy for a founder to be like, why are you doing that? Do this. Where that closed mindedness might not be empathetically enough for a founder who's building a whole different way. But I think that's a trip there. And so again, it's funny. It goes through waves and stuff. And I'm sure you read this, George. You're a super smart guy, but like the origins of venture capital actually come from founders helping founders.
Mhm.
It was a lot of salespeople that were selling hardware, right? That's how Sequoia got started. And Andreessen, right? Founder, like first round, like there's founders are all over this industry, but it's evolved over time and you need to give some credit to that.
Yeah, speaking of waves, that's usually how I do my segues. I'll just like latch on to a word you use and then ask the second question in case people are interested in interviewing. The one thing I always love asking founders is just mental health.
Mm.
Especially like I really really I have a lot of what's the word, appreciation, I guess, gratitude, empathy, whatever you want to call it, for someone who built something from scratch. You had 250 people reporting to you and on a payroll, and you then go through this exit, which I'm sure was a roller coaster ride. How did you just manage yourself through it all? Like a lot of ups and downs emotionally, basically.
It was the hardest, and there were many moments of doubt, George, right? I remember at one point calling my dad and be like, "Hey, I'm just working out. Like, can I get like 50 grand to get over, like to start again?" And so it's important to just be honest about that because there's many moments of doubt. I always said it's a marathon, and it was important for me to find some equilibrium, right? You can imagine how you just like raise your focus on something and you kind of like lose perspective. And for founders, that's true. For me, it was one of the funniest things. It was actually soccer.
Hmm.
You
Like
know,
playing soccer?
Soccer nut, giant soccer nut.
Really?
Uh, my co-founder now owns a team,
I saw that. Yeah, Knoxville. Let's
in
go.
Knoxville. I just got him yesterday.
I saw the LinkedIn post, you and Drew on
He's
the
doing
field with your kids. That's a full circle
exactly,
moment, man.
right? Isn't that
Uh,
crazy? But ultimately, I would wake up at 6 AM, work, grind, and then I'd go play soccer, and I would play soccer with firefighters and Uber drivers and just like, back to normalcy, right? And this like we were talking about this like how the American dream, but it'd be like tons of people from different nationalities and all sorts of stuff. And it would always bring me back to equilibrium that like life's good, like we'll be okay.
mm.
And it would check me back. And then I'd come back, shower, and then go again. But ultimately, it was just always about finding that time to work out, take care of my mental health. So, like, I don't know if I told you this yet, but like in high school, I lost 75 pounds by running. So it's like very important to me
Really?
to always like have some physical exercise once a day. And so to me, that always allows me to build perspective and take a break. Because to your point, if you have economic or business success and your physical health is awful, or your family health is awful, or your spiritual health is awful, it doesn't make sense. Why are you doing this? And so to me, when I use the word equilibrium, it's about growing the pie in multiple different facets. And I think I'll try to do my best to never lose sight of that.
Yeah, that's it's very critical because balance is a very tough thing to do, especially for a founder. Like
Yeah.
it starts and stops with you. So literally if you close the lights, like you almost feel like the business is at a stalemate and it's stalled until you come back and,
Well, I tell you again, I tell this to my founders, but like they are the biggest input on the output. So you better take care of that input, right? And like
Yeah.
George, I'm so lucky. I paid myself $40,000 for 5 years, and it sucked. And I feel so fortunate. Like our founders now have like legit livable salaries, and it's cool that people don't have to go through that anymore. But there are some real sacrifices people make. But ultimately, it goes back to like there's an emotional will that pushes you through, and that is the coolest thing ever. And once you do it once, it is the most addicting feeling on earth.
Yeah, that feeling when you, I mean, most people don't love to ask this, but like, come on, the feeling when everything was confirmed, it was official. Let's just be on, give us the good juice. I'm not asking for number. I'm just that I'm asking for emotions. Like,
Yeah.
what was the first thing you felt, and maybe the first thing you did after that exit?
It was a wild, like, week. I'll never forget because it was
Champagne everywhere.
it was, a wild 4 days. It was 2018, and it happened on July 1st. July 2nd was my birthday. July 3rd, we had a wedding planned in Rome, and July 4th was obviously July 4th. And so it was a blur of emotions, but I'll never forget, we were traveling with some friends, and, like, he showed me a picture on his phone, and it was, like, the most shared articles in, like, Chicago, and it was our sale to P&G, and then the Obama library announcement was number 2.
Uh, that's
And I was like, "Holy crap." And and, it was definitely like a moment where, like, craziness, but the thing I'll never forget was, and it's probably too much information, but, like, there's a lot of paranoia you carry, like, especially coming from private equity. A deal is never done until it's done and, like,
yeah.
the cash is in the bank. And so I'll never forget there and just, like, it's obviously a large corporation. So we're on the call with our lawyers, our bankers, their lawyers, their bankers, and you're confirming the wire details, and then all it's gonna refresh, and there's just a giant number there, and nothing changes though. Nothing changes, right?
Uh,
And because it's just a number. And clearly it's obviously like life changing in a lot of ways, but it's just weird. It messes with you. And it still messes to this day where like it just think about this, but like 99% of our family's net worth came from 3 conversations. Like it still blows my mind. And if I didn't show up well in those conversations, if I didn't,
what do you mean? What conversations were those?
like just conversations with P&G, right? Like when I
I
had to
see.
work the chain, like it was like, all right, they like us. Then you got to do this and you got to perform well in another one. And I'm sure obviously there were goods to back it up, but it was so important that we showed up well in those conversations. But even still to this day, right? I feel incredibly fortunate, George, to be in this position to be talking to you. But like I could have triple the net worth and I'd still be here, right now in Chicago, working on 81. And again, I just think after some point, incremental money does not give you incremental happiness. And so it's an incredible moment, but
Mm.
it was just part of the grander pie.
Yeah, it's funny that that's the most consistent answer I get from
Really?
speaking to founders who yeah, I've had Michael Hyatt, very well-known entrepreneur in Toronto. We used to be on Dragon's Den, sold his, tech company, Blue Cat, for, like, 700 million.
Wow.
Alan Lau sold Wattpad for 600. Like, everybody who I've talked to have had, like, substantial exits. Michael literally said that, it was cool like, I had this jolt of excitement when I saw the actual number change on my app, in my banking account, and then I literally took my dog out for a walk. So
100%.
so day to day, it didn't change much. Obviously, it feels better, and I feel, like there are things I can do in life that I'm more free and flexible to do, but structurally, it didn't change anything.
And I think when I go back, when I'm approaching my dying years, I'll look back and I'll do anything to go back to when I was 28 with Drew, without furniture, and had this crazy idea. And so ultimately, the journey is what matters. So that completely resonates with me. And honestly, you spend a lot of time with like people who had it and they might have their third or fourth house and, they're like third or fourth wife and they sometimes aren't happy. And you're like, all right, like obviously it's one part of life, but it's not every part of life.
Yeah, more well-rounded for sure. Can I ask you about pressure real quick? Because you mentioned those 3 conversations that you've had, which determine a lot of the net worth that you currently possess. And this is also why I have this Michael Jordan poster behind me. I've said this before on podcasts, but, 6 seconds, super important game. And how do you perform under pressure? And I've heard a lot of people talk about this athletes, like Kobe Bryant infamously says, it's just a free throw. Like, the world's not gonna end if I miss. But it's so easy to say that, and then you're Kobe Bryant playing in front of 60,000 people. Not many actually execute on that perspective. So when it feels like your life is literally on the line and everything you've been building comes to that point and you're sitting across an executive who is the decision maker in one of the most important meetings of your life, how do you remind yourself to breathe and just do what you're supposed to do?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think,
I'm trying to put you back in that moment is what I'm trying to do.
yeah, 2 thoughts come to mind. One, you hit it, but just take a deep breath.
Mm,
And at the end of the day, I think the last thing you ever want to do in any of these situations is be inauthentic. And I think what's great and beautiful about deep breath is it just helps you internalize you and who you are. And every moment of your life has been built up to this moment, and all you can be is yourself. Hopefully, with that, you'll structure your thoughts right? And come across polished. But the other thing is actually, in these tense moments, one thing I've noticed is people don't feel comfortable being vulnerable ahead of time. And I don't even know if I did this, but like in hindsight, I'm almost certain my co-founder and I prepped, or we found a friend and we're like, hey, can we role play this with you? Or whatever it might be, so that it just feels like a copy and paste, right? And you kind of almost get the stuff out there. And it goes back to the very first thing about, hey, we're gonna do Pressbox. Tell us the 12 reasons we're gonna fail. But ultimately, if you can do something where you're effectively dry runs, right?
Mm.
And this is the same thing as like practicing 900 times before you actually take the shot. But ultimately, in like business, I don't think people do that enough, right? Like role play it. Role play is really hard conversation. Be vulnerable ahead of time so you can get all those vulnerabilities out. And I'm sure we did that and we prepped accordingly, but ultimately making sure you like block out the time to seize the moment.
Yeah, role playing, visualizing helps. I know it sounds cheesy, but really seeing yourself in that moment,
Yeah.
it's funny how much it's actually helped me.
I think there's something different about thinking about it though and doing it. Like just do it. And it's so awkward to grab your wife or like a friend and be like, hey, just like act like, someone big and do this. But like it helps.
Yeah, that's true. Practice, practice, practice. I might want to end back on 81 collection because I know we kind of spoke about it in the middle. That's what I love about these conversations. Like I told you, it's not a no rigid Q&A, but because you started this in 2022.
Yeah.
So, you take 2 years basically after Tide Cleaners, you stay on with P&G for a little bit, and you continue growing Pressbox, from I think it's 1,200 locations, is it 2,000?
Yeah, it's more than 2000 now, franchise, corporate, and I'm still close to the PG team. I had an incredible experience there.
So what made you wanna start as someone who it's so ironic that you were bootstrapped, and then the first thing you wanna start after 2 years of a bit of a recharge is a venture fund.
It's funny, and even honestly, I don't even we're borderline not an adventure, honestly.
I've heard you say this before, you're like a mix of PE. So break that down. Why is that?
We believe that you don't need a ton of capital to build today. But the bigger thing is like I had $120,000 to get going. And I'm not sold everyone has that. Right. And so ultimately everyone needs a chance. And so for us, we want to be, these people who are going this unorthodox path, people who are just going, and trying to build their own Tide Cleaners in a newer form. They're in a desert of capital, right? They're too difficult to scale for venture capitalists and they don't have EBITDA, so it doesn't really qualify for PE. And, as I had the fortune of like kind of like open up our smaller family office and deploying into funds, I noticed that like, a decade had passed, George, but not much had changed in terms of financing. Everyone's still continuing to look for an asset light, employee light, obvious unicorn, and no issues with it. That is an incredible way to innovate and to make money. But that is not every flavor of innovation. And ultimately, we think there needs to be a pocket of capital that's allocated to these other things. And so ultimately, for us, we are trying to find dedicated capital pool. And you're going to laugh at this, but like we are trying to build not a unicorn, not a 40Xer, but like a solid 10 bagger. Like that is what we're trying to build, a portfolio of those. And it's honestly technically high growth equity because the way we scaled Pressbox was, dry cleaner was 1.6 orders per month was the average user, $26 per order. And with that 99% retention, it was just stacking an annuity after an annuity after annuity. You add new cities, you add new products, you add new channels, and all of a sudden you let them compound. And this was our like information asymmetry is that if you are patient and you focus on quality and you let these things compound, George, they actually produce exceptional results, right? On our transaction, we made 54 times our money. So it's venture, right? In terms of outcome, but very much differently. We would never have gotten there if we took a fast path. So the irony is to go slow, you actually get there faster.
Mm.
And that's what we're doing. And so for us, in person, we didn't talk about this, but like why I'm doing this is ultimately I love entrepreneurship. I realized I did miss investing, George. But most importantly, I'm really proud of all the jobs I created. I'm sure you've done your research, like we create a lot of those jobs. And because we bootstrap, we could only afford to pay people $20, $25 an hour. And it wasn't because we wanted to, it's literally all we could afford. And and as we grew the business, our employees all made more, right? The business grew, they made more, our vendors made more, our suppliers went more. And I went to my employees' weddings, I sent them buy homes. And like I realized by going this different path, not just did we build a good business, we built the right kind of business. right? You tie it back to Chicago, like, and why we're all here is like, this is the American dream. And so like, ultimately what guides me to work my ass off on this is like, I think we have a real chance to like put a dent in rebuilding the middle class. Because the truth is that, if we keep pursuing this asset light, employee light, blah, blah, blah world, the profits are going to 10,000 people. And it's boxing out, right? The Georges, the Vijens, our kids, and people who are trying to do this. And ultimately, if we lift these industries, we know we'll then lift these suppliers and vendors and communities. So ultimately, we are trying to do that. And it's fun. It's so hard, George, but it's fun.
Well, that's where the name comes from, right? I actually didn't know this before doing homework on this podcast, but the fact that 19% of the US economy attracts 55% of VC, that leaves 81% structurally underfunded.
Yeah. And you think about Chicago, right? Tying this back full circle. What's a lot of our economies? It's the 81.
Hmm.
To me, it feels like, this is a city where they ship granite down the river. This is where Hyatt and McDonald's and Crate and Barrel. Can you imagine these pitch meetings today? Wait, you're trying to what? You're trying to
Yeah.
build a hotel chain? You're trying to what? Create a shopping center? What? No way. And so I think this is a little bit of like an edge, again, playing back to our advantages. But in essence, and to be clear, we don't have it like only about 25% of our portfolios in Chicago. But what we believe is that this city can create a lot of value. And ultimately, even have our team is not even in Chicago, but we believe Chicago will be a formidable force in creating value for these companies, and there should be a presence here.
We're up on the hour. I got one last one for you. It can be a very quick answer
Yeah.
or not. As a father of two, we didn't really speak about, fatherhood a lot, but I try to if, families involved. What is one value that aside from the success, the businesses, you as an entrepreneur investor, what's one particular value you'd like to instill in your two kids? If not already, but when they think of Dad, Vijen Patel, what's that one value you always want them to remember you for?
No ego.
Hmm.
Always be humble, always be curious, approach every situation, every human with dignity, and be open-minded. And it's so hard in today's world. Time is limited, but ultimately there's always so much to learn. And everyone had to start somewhere, right, George? Like, I'm sure you've had the same story, your parents and grandparents, but ultimately what you say and what you do can change and alter someone's trajectory of their life. And that's something I try to never forget. And I sure as hell ensure that our kids definitely don't forget that either.
Love that. Well, they have a lot to be proud of. You have a lot to be proud of, and sincerely thank you for all that you shared on this
Yeah.
podcast, man.
Thank you for making the
Special.
time. I'm so happy we spent more time together.
That's
And
why I love doing these.
I love
Now we have an hour.
your questions were thoughtful. Again, you're curious, but more importantly, you're approaching everything the right way, George. And so I'm count me enrolled as a supporter for you.
Thank you.
We talked about relationships, but you've got a new fan in your corner. So don't
Well,
hesitate ever.
means a lot, man.
Of
Cheers.
course. Cheers, dude.